at the first episode of NA Spar Podcast, and with us is Ryan Lafferty. Hello, Ryan.
Hello. Glad to be here.
How is your feeling being the first host of the NA Spar, first guest of the NA Spar Podcast?
I'm very excited. I'm sure we'll have some fun times, interesting memes and all that stuff. Hopefully we'll have some other cool people on in the future, I'm sure. So this is hopefully the first of a cool set of episodes.
And with us today is Ryan, and I don't know how many of you know Ryan, but we'll get there. We'll start talking about Ryan in a little bit. But my first question that I have for you is based on one of your biggest achievements that I would say in like the debate land, and that's the Hamza debate god video that you made. So yeah, like tell us more about it.
Yes, so it is probably my biggest claim to fame as of yet, at least. And for what it's worth, it is probably the best thing I have done in debate because I still stand by that video as very entertaining at bare minimum. It was produced roughly around the time of Doxbridge Worlds 2021. It was just a kind of fun project. It didn't actually take that long. It's about an hour or so and just tweaking around in iMovie. You just stitch some funny videos of funny jokes and then put some music in the background, which apparently everyone in the comments says is too loud, but I suppose I like Imagine Dragons enough that I'm not irked by that much. And then you have a sort of funny-ish meme project by the end of it, complete with some really elementary iMovie twists with like, oh wow, that's Hamza's face zooming in and whatnot. So that is probably the biggest thing I've done that people would recognize. I think Matt Hazel shouted it out in one of his lectures, which was like very fun. And it certainly was fairly entertaining to make. Also, it's probably the thing that has gotten me the most recognition. Like there was multiple people have just randomly DM'd me over Zoom being like, did you make the Hamza debate video? And I was like, yes, that is me. So it's my celebrity claim.
So what was the thought process? Like what made you make that video? Like, were you that big of a Hamza fanboy? What were you suddenly like,
kind of, although I think even at that point I was probably less of a debate fanboy, period. So I think it was more just, I think Hamza's style is fantastic and more people should be funny like that. And I think humor and roasts are very entertaining and underused in debate. And it was a fun way to stitch together a series of funny Hamza lines that I think most people had probably seen in isolation. So I'm probably not the only person who every time Hamza did a debate tournament would watch the recording in search for the funny Spider-Man-esque lines that then would later become sort of a norm in debate. So stitching them together was fairly fun. The only regret I have with the video, there's one quote that's too long. It's the Tigrayan Civil War video that it lasts like 40 seconds and it takes too long to build up to the final punchline. But outside of that, I think the video nicely captures his style. So I thought it would be just fun to make. I made it like a random night. We DM'd it to Hamza anonymously, and then the rest is history.
I see. And what did Hamza reply?
You know, funnily enough, I don't know. One of my friends DM'd it, so I'll have to ask him, I suppose. But I think he referenced it later in the LSE Open finals, I've heard. I haven't watched the round yet. I fully confess I've watched snippets of it, but not that opening half. So I'll have to watch that, I suppose, and see what his official take is on it.
I see. Do you think like Hamza watching that video changed his debating style any bit? Did he become more funny? Did he become less funny?
I have no idea, although his speeches at the following Korea World were fantastic. So that being said, they were fantastic prior to that video and after that video, so who knows? I've always hoped that the video did not deter him from making jokes because I think the jokes are fantastic and they make speeches much more memorable. Because if we're all being honest, judging a like hour-long debate round is often quite boring. Like, you hate to say it, but like, I don't know, sitting there for 7-minute speeches where most people are, you know, even really good debaters probably say about like 5 or 6 minutes good worth of stuff in 7 minutes. So there's a lot of time that is kind of a little bit boring if we're all being honest. So having some jokes to lighten the mood is fairly fun. So I quite liked his speeches, and that's probably the biggest inspiration behind the video.
That's good to know. That's good to know. And now I want to sort of like, because in lieu of time, I want to move on to the second most biggest achievement that you've had in debating. That is, and finaling NAUDC as a freshman. Can you tell us more about the journey? Like, what did you expect in the tournament? How were your feelings when you reached NAUDC finals?
Sure. So probably the biggest feeling I have about NAUDC is that I hate that people call it nautic. Just the word sounds horrible. Much like when people say woodic, like a small part of my soul dies. I say wood. I've said it twice now, so I suppose two parts of my soul have died. So Voldemort would be mad at me, I suppose. But alas, I honestly didn't have very high expectations going in. We performed quite nicely. Interestingly enough, I had done very little debate prep prior to it. I had mostly just gotten into really reading a lot about post-conflict societies for about 2 months, and I was really desperately hoping for a post-conflict society motion, which we sadly did not get, and instead we got a motion about student unions in the developing world that I tried to make about post-conflict societies in some part of my brain, which didn't really work. But it was still fun. So I wasn't expecting to have a particularly great tournament or whatnot. I partnered with Maddie, who is exceptional, which helped quite a lot, of course. It helps to be partnered with someone who is very good at taking quasi-smart things that you said and then making them sound very smart, and then also making everyone else's very smart things sound very dumb, which is probably the most effective way you can rebut an argument, I suppose, although that's not exactly much advice. But overall, it was a very entertaining tournament, I'll say. We certainly had an unexpected outrounds run. We had kind of a nice quarters on an interesting art motion. I'm horrible at art motions. I do not know the first thing about art, so that was nice that we managed to sneak through. Semis, we thought we completely bombed, which I still maintain to this day. And I suppose the IMF must have wired the panel like $10,000 because we were pro IMF or something, and that's why we went through. And then finals, we had a wacky, I don't even know what to call the motion exactly. Philosophy motion, narrative motion, optimism motion, humanity motion, but a fun tournament all in all.
Yeah, and your success hasn't stopped there. You've gone on to win Sophia, and then you final DK win like last weekend.
Fair, although a quick asterisk on Sophia, which is that Tejas, who I partnered with for Sophia, is like, I don't quite know exactly like what his diet consists of, but whatever it is, it probably is just like raw debate powder because his brain is just built differently than I think any other human beings. In a very good way, to be clear. In like the person is exceptional at debate in a way that is minorly terrifying. Like, someone's good at debate when, how like there are people you're scared to debate against, but you're also scared like when you're their partner and you're like, oh my God, he's just going to annihilate every other team. And like, I have to like sit here on Zoom and like listen to every other team just get thrashed into oblivion. Obviously, it's more fun when you're seeing the thrashing as opposed to being on the receiving end of the thrashing, but still quite a fun tournament. We also had a lot of fun that tournament because I am probably one of the like 2 people on planet Earth who is a huge fan of the case that Tejas and Vivian ran in World Quarterfinals of Madrid, which is, for those of you who haven't seen it, about farms and agriculture. I think it's a fun argument and gets overly memed, so we named ourselves Farmville enthusiasts, and we upheld Farmville nicely. So I was very proud to represent Farmville properly. Go Farms.
And you redeemed it by winning the tournament.
Yes. Sadly, we didn't get to run a Farmville case. I was really hoping that we could actually just full on make some debate about agricultural fertilizer somewhere, especially if it wasn't about, agriculture, right? Like, the motion is something about, I don't know, international feminist movements, and somehow you make it all about, this is actually a debate about fertilizer politics and subsidizing access to fuel in the developing world. I was hoping we would get to sneak one of those in. It never really came up, but still, I hope.
Yeah, and your point about like debating with someone who just consumes raw debate powder and it being scary is definitely very relatable. Because like last weekend, for example, when I was debating with you, I think I had the same set of feeling as you had debating with Tejas. So yeah, I think a lot of us probably relate to that, debating with someone who's a great debater that you look up to, and then partnering with them and then not wanting to disappoint them, seeing them like trash the other teams consistently and you want to follow up like really, really well after them because you don't want to appear like, oh, you lost your team the round. So I think
precisely.
Yeah, I think there's huge set of experiences, and I think a lot of us can relate to that, especially when like pro-amming with someone who's like really, really strong. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
But that brings me to my next question, which is like, where did your debate career start? Like, how did you end up in debate?
So Well, I technically nominally started in middle school, although what I was doing in middle school could not really be called debate as much as just saying a lot of words fast. So interestingly enough, I was, not to brag, but I was many years ahead of the modern BP meta because 8th grade Ryan was incredibly fast speaking. Like Matt Cato would be blushing if he could see 8th grade Ryan. Like I don't even know what I was doing. I don't even know what I was saying. I was just saying a lot of words really quickly. It took me a lot of time though to figure out two things. The first is how to debate, like actually debate, make coherent arguments and fill time properly. And the second was to learn about the world. Turns out, and it took me a while to realize this, but if you don't know things, it's very hard to say smart things, which is a, stupid piece of advice. But candidly, the way I've improved the most at debate is just by learning more about stuff that's happening in the world. And for a very long time, I attempted to convince myself that wasn't necessary. So it was probably only a couple months ago where I was really like, yeah, I should start following the news. And then guess what? I started following the news and figuring things out about the world, finance, politics, economics, social movements, you name it. And suddenly things just became a lot more intuitive. Unfortunately, for many years in high school, I was attempting to defy that realization and hence did not do fantastically. But by the end of high school, I had some fun. I ran my fair share of meme cases, as every high schooler ought to do. I never did world schools, though. Team USA wouldn't have it, which is fine because they are very good now. I think they just broke at world schools. So go USA. I'm not particularly nationalistic, but go everyone at world schools. Woohoo, USA included. But anyways, that was kind of my way of getting started in debate. Sucked in middle school, sucked less in high school. I took a gap year post graduation. I did a bit of debate over that, but mostly just kind of like informal debate prep, by which I mean filling in content gaps and learning more about stuff that I just knew less about. So like, for example, I finally realized what finance is, like what a bond is, what a stock is. And not just like the Investopedia thing where everyone like looks up Investopedia and they're like, aha, a bond, that thing. And then they go into a debate about stocks or bonds and the concept is still quite fuzzy, but actually learning about them and trying to make sense of it. So that is kind of where I entered university debating and have been since then.
No, that's very fair. I think we've all been really scared of finance motions. Like all of my finance motions that I've ever ran, like I just run politics. I still don't even go into the finance territory. So
Yes.
I think that's the stage.
So it's funny because I, for a long time, was deathly terrified of finance motions. Still am to this day, to be fair. But like I was terrified for a while. Then I thought I got good at finance. I thought I knew like currencies, exchange rates, stock markets, dare I even say derivatives. And then I debated a finance motion. I was like, oh man, no, I don't have it. Then I learned more about finance. And I think finance is a weird topic area because there is this zone once you've once you've kind of like understood the basics of like the first things you'll see on like, the Wikipedia top of page section where you feel like I know finance. And then you start reading a bit more. And then you realize you don't know anything about finance. So for example, for a long while, I was like, okay, look, I understand the 2008 financial crisis. There was a housing bubble, the housing bubble burst, subprime mortgage market melted down, financial crisis. But then you actually read more about it and you're like, well, what the hell was like, Fannie Mae, or what role did CDSs play, or what did AIG's counterparties do after it, yada, yada, yada. And then you're like, oh shit, I actually do not know any of this. So I think finance is a weird example of something where, for me, I'm still in the process of being like, do I really know this? I don't fully know. One day I will probably reach that point. Currently, I'm still in the, I pray every time the motion song is like, something money related. It's not finance, because if it is finance, then that will be, sad boy hours and it will not be fun times. So that is my hope every time they put up like, ABBA's Money, Money, Money or something like that in the motion song channel on Discord.
Yeah, I think like finance is a weird sort of motion set where like it's very hard to know what the boundaries of spec are. That is, you don't want to just go on and just start like spewing finance, but like if you don't and the other team is doing it, you might be at a disadvantage. So you have to find the right like middle zone where you're using essential finance and responding to essential finance, but still making it like more stock debate argument that's convincing and rhetorical. And I think that's where like most people struggle with finance, I think, in general.
Yeah, I think it's probably also true about a lot of debates for that matter. So, like, for example, a really weird thing that I really like to do whenever matter filing is I'm very obsessed with headquarters. Like, for example, like the top of my IMF matter file is just like a picture of the IMF headquarters, its address, and like a description of the building. Like, I don't know why, but like, I really like to know like what the headquarters of like major like companies or governments or whatever are. And it's like the sort of spec that if I like, started a debate speech by like describing the, IMF headquarters in Washington, like as whatever, like, some illustration of neoliberalism and, technocrats in the West dictating economic policy abroad, yada, yada. I mean, the sort of thing that it's like, well, a judge will be like, this is kind of useless. But I'm like, well, I liked it. It was fun spec. But there are lots of other cases more seriously where that I think is also an issue. Something I've also found with that as well is kind of like learning proper nouns and then not knowing whether they're super useful in the context of a debate. Like, say the name of, like major territories in Ukraine where violence is ongoing. If you base an argument around very specific, geographic fact claims, like, well, Donetsk is the present area where most violence is occurring, or, the port at Odessa is where the next stage of warfare will be. Different judges might credit that differently. I think the tactic I've generally found that works better is you sort of use proper nouns or examples to substantiate or lend credence to claims that you've already offered analytic support for. So, for example, if you say XYZ claim is true, for example, and then insert some example, it can be fairly useful. That way, instead of it being like, not to wade into the whole structural reasons versus empirical fact claims, etc. But that way, it's more difficult for a team to be like, that's a fact claim, bro. And then you're like, well, it's a true fact claim. And then the debate devolves from there.
Yeah, I think that's definitely interesting because I feel like a lot of judges like think of assertions to a varying degree and examples to a varying degree. Because I feel like some examples are more representative and illustrative of the processes than like some structural reasons teams might give. And I think people need to weigh examples more because I feel like some examples are so representative of the processes these things take place by that often at times, even if you do assertions of why things are working without giving like structural reasons or mechanism, I think they would be more convincing to an average reasonable voter.
Yes. The other thing that I personally think people underdo with examples, to be clear, this fully includes myself. I'm not exempt from this criticism, but there seems to be a thing that happens a lot in debates where team A says example, and then the other team is like, well, that's just an example. We can counter assert. And then they're like, oh, here are the 4 structural reasons why the opposite claim is more true. And then teams are like, oh, shucks, like, guess we have to go back to the structural reasons debate. But like more often than not, if there is a viable counterexample, like, I don't know, say that you're having a debate about social movements and whether they should embrace radical or moderate messaging. And you're like, here's an example of a movement that succeeded because it was radical. And the other team's like, no. Here are the 17,000 structural reasons as to why moderation is the way to go. And then teams are like, well, shucks. Guess the example's out. But obviously, there was some reason, like some underlying structural reason why your one-off example that can be counter-asserted was true in that case. So if you just analyze why counter-examples exist, like it's often a useful way to then back your way into the structural analysis. So like something that I personally like to do quite a bit is I kind of think about a lot of arguments as like example driven, and then like kind of once you have an example in mind, you can kind of like back up from there and kind of like fill logic in to explain why certain outcomes happen. So like, for example, if you acknowledge, say, corruption is a problem in certain government bureaucracies, and there are many examples of corruption scandals, well, once you know that that's a fact that does happen at least somewhere, you can then back your way up into saying what are the underlying reasons that's a problem, which is often easier than doing the inverse, which is coming up with XYZ structural reasons and then trying to like rack your brain or control F through some massive Google Doc to be like, and what's the example for this? So I think it's a useful way to break the, I think the word deadlock is like a crime against debate, but break the deadlock that often arises in fact claim type things.
No, that's for sure. Okay, so let's move on. So you were like we talk about your middle school debate, we talk about your high school debate. Let's move into your university debating. So what is like debating in Dartmouth? If you can like tell us more about experiences, like how the team is like, how do you feel, and so forth.
Yeah, the team is super lovely. They're all wonderful, wonderful people. Shout out to all of them. The only downside, of course, is that for those of you who have ever looked at a map of the United States, Dartmouth is in this little place called Hanover, which is basically surrounded by trees more or less everywhere. It's very pretty, it's lovely, it's beautiful. However, it is very far from most other places. Of course, Dartmouth's not the only place in the United States or world for that matter, that's far away from other universities, so I'm hardly alone in that pain. But it does mean that like even just traveling to other tournaments often does require a fairly lengthy drive, so by the time you get out of the car, you're like, I'm ready to debate and my legs are killing me. So by God, I'm hoping I get to debate some motion about like high-speed rail or something, and I'm going to run an entire argument on increasing attendance at debate competitions because, boy, oh boy, that'll show them. That being said, I don't think the U.S. Department of Transportation bases their transit decisions off of the needs of debaters. Anyways, there probably are two other things I'll flag about university debate, at least for me. So the first is that I'm in the interesting position, if I do say so myself, of doing both British Parly and American Parly, also known as APTA, which depending on where you come from is either a great term that people love or a term that is terrible and people hate. They're very different, and I do think for what it's worth, a lot of the like BP criticisms of the new BP meta, like if people like walked into like a lot of APTA debates, they would be far more horrified of what's happening there, and to some extent also vice versa. So it is interesting to traverse those two worlds, even though I do probably both fairly similar-ish amounts. The second kind of interesting transition as well, I think, is like the transition to like college level debate, by which I mean in high school, I kind of benefited in that I largely attended regional tournaments. Which was fun because you debate the same people, you see the same faces, so on and so forth. And you get a pretty good idea of, you know, which teams are very scary, which teams to look out for, so on and so forth. And that part is still true university level, but you also just get your ass kicked a lot more, which is certainly, I think, a valuable educational transition, although certainly takes some time getting used to. Like there are far more rounds I've had in the last year or two where I left the round being like, well, we just got like, you know, absolutely hammered by some other team in the first 30 seconds of their speech. But I think that also is a pretty valuable experience. You learn a lot from it and you kind of grow from those experiences. You don't learn as much from like winning again and again and again than you do by getting your ass whooped and being like, well, hopefully that never happens again, and then trying to learn from it and moving on after that. So that was probably the other big transition, was being like, you know, you're no longer the kind of big fish in the pond, I think is the phrase.
Oh, and that brings me to the next question that I wanted to ask, which is, what is your biggest debate failure? And this could be a tournament, this could be a round where you thought you just like peed your pants and there's nothing went well.
I'm trying to think if there's a specific one that springs to mind. There are a couple of certainly like random bloopers. One of them is that I have a bad habit of, I'll often, like if I want to make a joke, I'll like make it several times in a speech, which is not bad. The problem is when the joke is wrong. So for example, I once did a debate in essence about weightlifting or something relating to weightlifting. And for some reason, the phrase that people will use is gym rat, like someone who goes to the gym a lot. And for some reason in my head, it was gym nut. So I kept making a bunch of nut jokes in my speech. So I like opened my speech by being like, let's crack this case apart, Your Honor, or, you know, some stupid thing like that. And everyone in the room kind of like kept looking at me like, what exactly is going on here? And here I was just thinking it was a tough audience. And then after the round, someone was like, Ryan, what on earth is a gym nut? I was like, someone who goes to the gym a lot, and it turns out it wasn't. So there's like a fair number of moments like that. Or like, for example, when I was in high school, I had a debate about whether we should be able to indict sitting US presidents. The word indict is spelled INDICT, and one might naturally think as a politically uninformed high schooler that the word is pronounced indict, which it is very certainly not. And, you know, any opponent who, you know, knows that will kind of roast the hell out of you for that. So I kind of got Hamza'd pretty bad in that round, I think. So there's probably like lots of random bloopers like that of things where I just kind of like, you know, did something kind of odd or somewhat strange. I think there are certainly rounds I've had that were just like complete, absolute, you know, blowouts, or just like speeches that I kind of look back and I was like, what on earth was I even doing there? Like I had one round, for example, back like probably a year and a half or 2 years ago at Docs Worlds on a motion about basically like different structures for how new democracies should structure their legal systems. And it was 7 minutes of me like saying words where I was like, I don't really know what I'm saying. I know I'm not saying smart things. I know I'm not even saying right things. And I'm not even sure if I'm like defending the right side of the motion. And like, I was very happy. I just filled 7 minutes bluntly. Like I was like, yeehaw, we did it. We ended the speech. But it was like one of those rounds that you just leave it feeling like, wow, this was fairly brutal. I think the worst experiences, though, at least in my experience, are rounds where you think you do a bad job and then there's someone after you who's very good. And so not only did you do, like your speech was mediocre, you underanalyzed stuff, your analysis was weak, your rebuttal was non-existent. And someone else comes up after you and is like, well, let's set the record straight on who's winning this debate. And then you kind of get thoroughly walloped by someone who really knows what they're talking about. So that probably is like, I'm not sure there's a specific round that comes to mind for me of that. There certainly are cases of that. I think the other example I'll have to do like an honorary shout out is just like closing in BP behind matter dense teams that burn like everything imaginable. Like I've closed off of Naomi, I think twice now. And those rounds will just be like forever ingrained in me because it is a very unusually terrifying experience. They can make horror movies out of this stuff of like coming into prep and you've got like all your notes ready and you're like, all right, we're going to like have a great extension, guys. And then you just keep crossing things off. And then, 3 minutes into PM and you're like, our entire case is gone. So that's probably the other context of in-round situations that I think I've probably felt the worst in, of being like, well, you're barely into PM and we already know that somehow we're the 4. So that's probably the other type of experience I'd classify as probably worst debate memories.
Yeah, that's totally relatable. I think Tokyo Ivy round 4 is the same for me because that speech was recorded and we had David Africa in OG, Miko Betogi in CG, O was Mauricio and Matty, and then we are CO in that motion. And I've done that motion from Gov side similar, and I thought it was broken. And now we are CO. And there's one winning path in that like side, and the OG takes it. Like OO takes it. They use like a prop, everything. Beautiful speech. And I'm like, we have to take some part to victory. I don't want to like just be there. And that could be like exhausting feeling when you feel like you have nothing left. And and I also remember like moments, because generally when you're debating and once you cross a certain level, I think 7 minutes feels too small usually. But you'll once in a while have those moments where you miss out on your train of thought or you lose your papers. And because you're used to debating for 7 minutes and filling things, or like always it feeling small, and suddenly for the first time in your life, you're like, fuck, this speech needs to end so fast. And you'll repeat things, you'll try to like just sound like debaterish and hope that the speech ends in 7 minutes. And I've definitely had those moments. They're rare, but when they happen, it's like definitely interesting.
Yeah, precisely. I do think that debate is a very psychological game in lots of ways. Like for example, even just like the psychology of like how you present your own speech, I think like is something that's kind of wild. Like I think one of the biggest things that my mindset has shifted on since I've gotten the like opportunity to partner with very good debaters is people will give like really, really powerful and persuasive speeches. And then afterwards they'll like DM you and be like, oh, that was so bad or whatever. And I'll be like, wait, it was? Because like you were saying it and like you said it like you were like winning really, really comprehensively and concretely. So I think the psychology of like how you convince yourself that what you're saying is sensible is an underrated element of the game, at least in my personal opinion. I also just think that there are some arguments that the only way to sell them is to really convince yourself first that they're true and then sell them to someone else. Like I think that there are lots of cases, at least in my experience, I found where there are arguments that unless you actually convince yourself first that what you are saying is correct and then pitch it persuasively, not even just analytically, like how many mechanisms do you have, but like, do you actually present an argument as if it seems correct? Has a real impact, I think, on like whether judges credit arguments and see them as plausible and as kind of reasonable. And I also think that there's just a lot of other psychological aspects of the game. So like, for example, one of my probably more controversial opinions is that I kind of prefer actually taking a somewhat chill attitude in prep. Like, I'm not huge on like really stressful, intense, like, we have to maximize the efficiency of every minute in prep type claim. Not because it's not a good idea to maximize the efficiency of every minute in prep, but because at least for me, I think rolling into rounds with a relatively calm state of mind is just, at least for me, much more important than like being like, we have maximized the debating utility of every second of prep time. So I think a lot of the like getting to know your own psychology is also fairly useful in debate, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I think psychology is a very underrated part because personally for myself, I feel, and based on your question that you said that like a lot of people say that speech was so bad even though they were giving a good speech. I think it's you have certain vision in your head based on prep, based on before your speech started. And then when you're delivering it, you feel like you couldn't get it done, the thoughts you had in your head. And I think that's something a large majority of people also suffer with to some extent. That is, they have generally good ideas, but when you're giving the speech, you feel like you're not presenting it and something is being lost than what is in your head. And I think that can also like give like lower levels of confidence on how you're debating per se. So I definitely think like psychology, just like any other sports, is a essentially essential but overlooked part of debate here.
Yeah,
Okay,
I agree.
Yeah, in lieu of time, let's move on to one more question, which I wanted to ask you. And in our like local NA Spar group, you're popular for giving 1 hour OAs and 9-page written feedbacks. Tell us more about it. How much of a debate nerd you are? Why do you have like RFDs that are super long, where you go through every part to victory of every team that was possible and so forth?
So I will start by noting that this is probably a bad habit I have as a judge. Apparently, people do not love, being on Zoom until 3 a.m. listening to me be like, well, your second mechanism was persuasive but failed for these 7 reasons or whatever. That being said, so there's kind of, I think, 2 reasons. One is, I suppose I am a debate nerd, although I do think that there are lots of people out there who are probably much more rigorous in training than I. I think I'm more naturally just kind of interested in debate than I am addicted to debate, so to speak. So I suppose that is at least part of it. I think the second is that, at least in my personal opinion, like I think judging is actually exceptionally cool as a practice. Like I think the idea of like listening, especially to good debates and judging them, is like just a very underappreciated art. In the sense that, like, I think there is something very cool about listening to 8 smart people talk for an hour about an interesting topic. It's also why I think setting cool and topical motions about important things is like something that is very valuable. Like, I think debating actual important issues in the world is just fun to listen to as a judge. And so to that extent, I think it's kind of an injustice to then, try to pack down a really good and comprehensive debate into like a 5-minute like little quick OG CO CG OO or whatever. I think the other reason why though is that at least in my personal opinion as a judge, like I know that as a debater on like the debate side of things, it means a lot to me when like a judge provides like a very useful overview of how they viewed the debate, and not just like holistically OG weighs their impacts more than OO and so they place over OO, but like I think it's often really nice as a debater to get an idea of like how judges just like felt about arguments, like how they credited them, to what extent they found them persuasive, even the ones that don't end up affecting the debate. Like there are lots of rounds that I think probably a lot of people can feel where they'll make an argument that they think is very good and then judges won't find it as good. And I think it's pretty reasonable for debaters to like want a explanation or, kind of like rationalization for why that argument didn't stick with the panel as much. The last reason I'll say is that I think that, at least in my personal experience, one of the best ways to get better at debate, not only is to judge, which is something that a lot of people far smarter than I have already highlighted, but also to really try as much as possible to not lose on a topic you've already debated, or to not like do a bad job with a motion that you feel like you should be comfortable with. By which I mean, I think that there are some motions that get thrown at you that you are truly just like, I do not know what the hell is happening here. And in those cases, like you give a weird PM, your extension is off class, your framing a little bit doesn't make sense. Like that's completely understandable. It makes a lot of sense, and it's happened to me more times than I can count. The rounds that I'm a little bit more like, I really want to make sure I do a particularly good job in, are rounds where I'm like, I actually know what's going on here. I know examples of this in the real world. I have a good idea of what clashes will be and so forth. And executing those debates well is, I think, like those are the debates that are most within your control. And so I think whenever you get a chance to judge a motion, you get a chance to essentially holistically evaluate four teams' cases honestly. And that's a pretty good exercise for yourself to be like, if I ever get a topic adjacent to this motion, I should feel decently comfortable with it, even if I'm not going to knock it out of the park and stuff like that. So I think judging is a very cool way, not just to get a better sense of like round division, which is something that as a debater, I'm horrible at. Like I have a very poor sense of going into the round, like what the clash will be. I very rarely have a good idea of that, full transparency. And the people who are like able to do that very rapidly amaze me. Like people who like see a motion and they're like, yeah, well, the clash will be about like these different benefits competing against each other, I think is a skill that I'm still working on. I think a nice way to approximate it is like if you judge rounds and you get an idea of what major things are in those motions, similar motions inevitably come up. There's only so many debates out there, and there's a lot of cross applicability that you can get from judging and judging pretty thoroughly.
No, yeah, for sure. I think like everyone here will agree, and I think all of us sometimes wanted judges to go through our case more deeply than them saying, "Oh, it was all derivative."
Yeah.
But
I'm
yeah.
also of the probably minority opinion that like, and this is probably objectively controversial, but I actually think the average debate is quite good. Like, I think that the average team's case is actually pretty solid. And I think, obviously, like, the debate community is interesting in the sense that like everyone is trying to improve. Judges know that like just showering praise on you for 15 minutes is probably not a good thing for like improvement. But I do think that a lot of debates are just like really good debates, and even like mid rooms I think are often actually quite good. And obviously there's like a negativity bias where both debaters and judges will like focus on like the naturally bad things in a team's case or strategy or whatever, and like that makes sense. If you have a 15-minute OA, it doesn't make sense to start with 3 pieces of general commentary on what everyone did great in the debate because you have 15 minutes. And, at the end of those 15 minutes, like the Zoom gods are going to come in to hurdle you out of your breakout room with the force of tabbing. But like, I think that a lot of debates are just like quite good. And there's a lot of joy, at least for me, in like listening to like good debates and judging them. And I think in particular in good rounds, like, I think it's very fun to be in and to watch good debates. Like, I think part of the reason why like watching, like one of the big things I've done for years now is like basically watching almost every live stream as it plays out. Like my junior year of high school, I stayed up like to a gazillion hour to watch. Curiously enough, I'm still very proud of this fact, the live recording of the 2020 Worlds Final until they took it down because of the controversy over the motion and I think like there had been translation barriers and so forth. But like, I think watching really good debates in action is a very fun thing to do, and by extension, judging them is even cooler.
No, yep, for sure. And we're running out of time, so I want to just get to the last 2 questions. Then, my first question is about the most controversial call that you thought was objectively the worst call you ever got. So we will try to be anonymous. So don't say the tournament, don't say who your partner was, don't say who the judge was, but like just give a general description of what is like the most horrible call that you think you've ever got in BP debate.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of an unusual one. There was, I won't say the tournament or motion or anything like that, but there was one tournament where I took a first from closing, where I hard fourthed, like without a question, like no doubt whatsoever in my mind. This was many months ago now, so it's not even that recent. But like without a doubt, like I'd walked into the room fully expecting to like fourth very hard and get like a thorough whooping in OA. And the panel had us first with like good speaks. And to this day, I like from a strict perspective of what was the wackest call, we ran a case that I thought was very debate land and was very not true, and was under mechanized and underweighed. All the ingredients for what I thought would be like a surefire, like it was as if we had tried to fourth, and like the panel was just like stubbornly unwilling to give us a 4. So that probably is like the worst call I've ever received, where I was so convinced that we had fourthed. I always do this thing at tournaments where like I have my notes app and I like write the call for open rounds, and I had like written us in as the 4. Like I had written in for 4, like CG. I'd been like, we are fourthing. And then alas, we did not fourth, which was very odd. So that's probably the wackiest or most sus call I think I've received. I don't know to what extent there are like other calls that I strongly disagree with. I'm probably in I don't know if I'm in the minority on this one, but like I actually probably agree with the vast majority of calls I get. Most debates, I think, are subjective enough that there are probably 2 to 3 variations of a call that are completely valid. Like there are lots of debates where I think there are many comparatives that can fully be flipped. And the idea of like there being a right call has never fully made sense to me. Like debate is inherently subjective, and I don't fully know if there will ever be like a clearly right call in most debates. But that is definitely the call where I was most like, maybe we could have thirded. Maybe we, even if we were lucky, could have seconded. But no way in hell did we first. So that was probably the weirdest call.
Did the RFT make sense?
So I suppose it did. I was just like very, and in retrospect, in all fairness, I probably wasn't listening as closely as I should have been because I was more kind of just caught off guard. And I think I spent a good chunk of the OA just kind of making eye contact with the other closing team who had thought they had thirded and had seconded, and what we thought was a very clear top half, and we were both like, what happened here? So I probably wasn't listening as close as I should have been, but that was probably the weirdest call I've received.
I see. That's very fair. And I think it's a good idea to generally at least take all OAs in a manner that they are a perspective, even if it's clearly the wrong OA that you think. And I think many of us feel like there are often OAs that are like clearly wrong decisions or not the right justification for a given decision. But I think, especially since debate is a game of convincing the panel, I think it's useful to get all kinds of perspectives you get from different calls, because you're not always just appealing to the chair, especially at, for example, words where you might have like 5 people panel. Like, if the chair is unable to convince other people, I don't think they'll necessarily like get you the point. So I think the ability to convince not just the best, fastest cracker judges of all time, but also the like first year novice who's here listening to your speech is, I think, an invaluable art. And the more perspectives you get, which might differ from you, tell you what are things that might improve your debating in general. Yeah, for sure. Okay, finally, last question. You are well known as a big debate memer. That is, you are very good at the quick draw. That is, people say one word, next moment Ryan throws in a meme. Very pertinent to the situation. I've also heard you wanted to do a meme round. That is, you want to like communicate a debate round flow with just memes. So my question there is, where do you get all of this meme power from? All of this meme accuracy? How long have you trained? And yeah, thoughts on the meme round?
Yes, so I've been an aspiring meme lord for many years. My skills originally were very bad when I was a meme Padawan for many years. I was quite poor at it. Like in retrospect, the memes I was making like 3 or 4 years ago were just abominations. Like those should not, that combination of pixels like should not have been allowed. I would have gladly accepted any form of censorship in the world to stop those memes from being sent. I have, however, grown. So my general let's say paradigm on memes is 3 things. The first is that in order to be good at memes, I do genuinely think you have to be fast, because the best meme opportunities often go by quite quickly, especially in debate rounds. So like, for example, I have long maintained, and I will still maintain, that I have a standing offer that if anyone wants to do a meme competition with me, by which I mean we only flow in memes, like as in like casing, taking notes, everything, like no matter what position, anything, like everything is done in memes, like framing, it's a meme, argument 1, mechanisms, like everything is, there's no Google Doc, there's no pen and paper. I've always had that offer out there, but I do think that speed is quite important. The second is that I do think that forcing yourself to move outside your comfort zone in meme making is very important. So for example, recently of late, in the past year-ish, I have attempted to move into GIFs. If anyone pronounces it GIFs, they have forfeited probably all claim to their human rights. That is not right. I'm still working on that. I'm a very amateur GIFer. I'm currently in the process of developing those skills. I think the last thing, in order to become good at memes, and this is my big philosophy, is that in order to be good at making memes, you must consume a large number of them, largely from different sources. So I spend a very unhealthy amount of time on Reddit, If I spend as much time as I spent on Reddit, matter filing and reading the news, I would have won like 7 worlds by the age of like 6 probably. And it wouldn't have really been close. Like I would have broken on like 28 points out of a possible of 27 and just demolished things. But anyways, Reddit, I think, and other similar platforms are a good place where you can soak in a good range of memes that then also has applicability to debate. And for what it's worth, basically, no offense to other social media platforms, but they all just steal their memes off Reddit. Like all of the Instagram memes, all of the Twitter, they're just Reddit, just regurgitated. So if you learn on Reddit, you basically learn all of them. I've never been on TikTok, so I can't attest to whether TikTok steals Reddit memes, but I assume they do. So that is my philosophy on meme making. And I think if you can get good at making memes, it has no relevance to debate, frankly. That being said, I'm still very much excited for hopefully one day like a motion about memes, like strictly about memes, not like political memes or whatever, like memes in certain communities, like just a motion strictly about like, you are the child who is standing in front of the burning house. Like what happened and what does this house do? Like motions about memes for the sake of memes should be set. And yeah, they should be a great final round topic.
I mean, you would have loved Brown ABDA final.
I know. Brown ABDA had some fantastic topics. This is my other bad debate take. I objectively recognize it's a bad take. I fully accept it's a bad take. But I think that if there are interesting motions that are interesting debates, even if they have some side balance or like depth problem, and they are underlyingly good motions, they should be set. I know that's a controversial take, but like if it's a fun, interesting, engaging motion about an important issue, set it.
No, yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, like we often run like very stocky ideas again and again, same kinds of debate. But I think there's so many areas from the real world that can be explored into debate and make the activity just even better and even more educational. So you have to come creatively think out of the box. You can't run the same stock state power principle that you learned, like, I don't know, at the age of 6. So yeah, okay. But yeah, here's Ryan, the meme lord. I think you have become the meme lord you seek to, like you aspired to be. So I think you're doing a great job there. I hope you become the meme world champion there. But yeah,
I will work on that.
Yeah, that's all the questions I have. Do you have anything to say to the audience in the last minute?
I probably should have prepared a more interesting or exciting thing to say. Not particularly. I suppose I'll say 2 things on my metaphorical soapbox. The first is I think that debate is a lot of fun, and I think that one of the better and underrated ways to get better at debate, at least in my personal experience, and to be clear, I'm not like that good at debate. Like it's not like I'm speaking as someone with like a tremendous level of like competitive success, but like at least for me, I think one of the best ways I got from like decent to like better than decent was just like actually having like a decent time at tournaments. I think stress has more of an effect on competitive performance than might otherwise be noted. And even if you can like stress your way into a break every now and then, I think the overall effect it has on like your ability to do a lot of training and reading and stuff like that is just on balance a nightmare. So I think like actually having fun at tournaments, and also like acknowledging that like, like losing happens, and also like kind of coming to terms with that. Like the way that I think about most losses is like, cool, like there was a team that had like a better, more persuasive case. Like that's fun. Like there's value in that. And like kind of having decent-ish ways of dealing with loss, I think can be fairly useful for having some level of meaning in the activity. Probably the second other thing I'll say is like, I think that in general, debate is probably at its best when people are like good human beings to other human beings. I know it is very, cliche, and then saying it's cliche is also cliche, as is this, and so on and so forth. But like candidly, I think that like, at least in my personal experience, like the tournaments I've been the happiest with are not per se the tournaments I did the best at, but tournaments that like you kind of leave feeling like you had some useful time doing something that wasn't just like screaming at other people and bullying, like the poor opening government because like they had like a horrible model and you spent like 7.5 minutes in, your whip speech, like just annihilating them. Like, I think, not to say that like there isn't room for, legitimate criticism and rebuttal. I mean, debate is by nature adversarial, but being a good human being, I think is like, at the end of the day, debate is fun. It's also collegiate debate. There are bigger things in life, and being a human being is one of those.
No, yeah, I totally agree. I think debaters talk about debate rounds too often after debate rounds. And we need to talk about more interesting things after a round gets over, rather than what is the stock that you ran, our OG captured everything, and so forth.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, fun talking with you, Ryan. Everyone, here we had Ryan today. And yeah, we'll be back next week with more fun people. Stay tuned, subscribe, like. See you.
Thanks so much.